Okay, so I just wanted to talk about the three main fabric types. Now this is very basic information, but it's important to know, especially when you're working on a sewing project, so you're picking out the right fabric for your project. But I also think it's really important for everyone to know, just so they're a little bit more aware when they're shopping and why things can't fit a certain way or why things are made a certain way, and also just to help you if you want to take something to get altered and you can understand a little bit better what they can and can't do. So the three main fabric types are wovens, cut and sew knits, and sweater knits. Okay, so the first one we'll discuss is wovens. Now, wovens are, I think the best way to explain it is if you remember making basket weaves or like those little paper placemats in like first grade or kindergarten. Now it's that same concept, but it's on a very small scale. So you're taking like a yarn or a thread and they're weaving it, wovens, to make a fabric. So now a fabric that's really thick and chunky will have either thicker yarns or in a tighter weave, and then fabrics that are finer or even sheer and thinner will have lighter threads and a lighter weave. So there can also be a lot of different types of weaves that are used to make the fabric, and that'll give the fabric a different look, different effects, sometimes more of like a pattern look. So it's a little bit more complicated, but the concept is still pretty much the same. Another characteristic of woven fabrics is that it doesn't really stretch very much. Some wovens have, if they have spandex in them, they'll stretch, but weaves aren't really made to stretch, so these garments usually require something extra in order to get it on and off, like zippers, buttons, those kinds of closures. So most clothing that you'll find woven fabrics in are things such as dress shorts, most dress clothing, dress pants. Denim is usually a woven, but a lot of times it does have spandex in it now. And most home fabrics are woven. Okay, so I'm just going to show you an example of a woven fabric, and then we'll move on to knits. So now this is a woven fabric. You can see how the edges are frayed. You can also see how it doesn't really have a lot of stretch, but when I stretch it on the bias, that's diagonally, it has more stretch that way, but it doesn't have a stretch going across the body. So the second main fabric type is cut and sew knits. Now cut and sew knits are exactly what it says in the name. It's a knit fabric that's knitted on a machine, and then you buy it by the roll, and then you cut out the pattern pieces and sew it. Now just like woven fabrics have different weaves, knit fabrics have different stitches. So it can be stitched in different ways in order to give the fabric a different texture or react a little bit differently, but the most common one that you're probably familiar with is jersey, which is made in most of your clothing and t-shirts. So knit fabrics tend to have a lot of stretch, so usually those items don't need special closures unless it's a very complicated style, so it's easy to get on and off. Very good if you wanted to have very fitted clothing like activewear and things that need to be really versatile, as opposed to the workwear or formal clothing, which tends to be woven. Okay, so next I'll just show you an example of a knit fabric. This is a knit fabric. You can see how the edges aren't frayed, and you can also see how it does have a lot of stretch. I can pull it very far, so it will stretch really well around the body. And at the edges, you can see how the fabric is rolled. So the last fabric type I want to discuss is sweater knits. Now, sweater knits are knitted a similar way that cut and sew knits are. They have different stitches they can use, but they're knit on different machines with thicker yarns, and there's a reason the other knits are called cut and sew, because sweaters are not cut and sew. The pattern pieces are knitted into the shape of the pattern, so it's all one piece. You don't need to hem it. The finishes are all knitted full fashioned in one piece, and there's no sewing involved at all. Now sweaters react differently than cut and sew knits. They might not have as much stretch sometimes, and they're usually made with different fibers. They do have different stitches, just the same as the other knits, but you can't cut it because the garment will unravel if you pull on an end that has been cut. So that's one of the reasons you don't cut and sew sweater fabrics. Sweaters can be chunkier or lighter depending on the yarn or the gauge, but that's a more complicated conversation. But overall it's similar to the way wovens can be chunkier or lighter, or knits can be chunkier or lighter depending on the yarn or thread type that's used. Now another difference between the other fabrics and sweaters is that the patterns are usually knitted right into the sweater, whereas with a knit or a woven, they're generally printed on top. Now there's obviously different scenarios where there are certain weaves where it has a pattern in it, or certain knit stitches where it can have the pattern in it, like double knits. But for the most part, if you're gonna buy something that's patterned, or it's going to be printed if it's a woven or a cut and sew knit. But with sweaters, the pattern is knitted into the garment. So here's an example of a sweater knit. And lastly, this is an example of a sweater knit. Now this one doesn't have as much stretch as the knit fabric, but that depends on the stitch. You can also see that the edges will unravel when the yarn is pulled. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the basic fabric types. So I hope you learned something. Please let me know if you have any questions, but if you're working on any sewing projects, I hope this helps you decide on the right fabric for your project. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Please subscribe to my channel and follow my posts on my website, sewsiz.com. That's SEWSIZ.com. And follow me on social media. It's Instagram @sewsiz, Facebook page @sewsiz, and Twitter @sew_siz. So thanks for watching.